It's been 84 years.
Well, here we are, over a decade since part 1 and $500,000+ later, and time 2 is finally here. So was it worth the price tag? For those who need to be filled in, let me briefly explain the history behind this album. Wintersun was originally formed as a side project by musician Jari Mainpää when he was the original guitarist and lead vocalist for Finnish folk metal mainstays Ensiferum. Depending on how you look at it and who you talk to, he either left or was ousted in 2004, leading him to focus all of his time on Wintersun. They released 2 albums in a self-titled in 2004 and then Time 1 in 2012. And remember that 8-year gap, because ironically, time is going to become a theme here. Recording and mixing for Time 2 began just a year later in 2013, but 4 years after that, in 2017, they announced that their third album would instead be The Forest Seasons, released that same year, and started a crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo to build their own studio for Time 2. Now, I actually remember quite well when this happened, as every metal outlet was talking about the move, many in an understandably critical tone. How many bands actually need their own studio to make a great album? Jari was branded further as a bit of a narcissist, but to their credit, fans ended up raising €150,000 in just one day and nearly $500,000 over the course of the fundraiser.
We're not just doing this for money. We're doing it for a shitload of money!
Now, as much as I respect fans' willingness to send their hard-earned money of their own free will, that dollar sign very much raised more and more eyebrows with each year that passed after this time, and the addition of further campaigns like the Time Package pre-order didn't help either. Not to mention perspectives on Jari further soured with his somewhat terse responses online to what he perceived to be impatience with the progress on the record and lack of trust in regards to where the crowdfunding money has been going. Forgemaster Metal Reviews did a great video covering that in much more detail that you can check out here.
Basically saying that it's none of the fans' business what the band does with the campaign money.
Oof. That's a mega yikes, bro.
It is, and you should be accountable for that.
Wow, dude, how does it feel to be wrong? All the money from the crowdfunding has been going back into the music production? Where else would I put the money, dude?
But people started to wonder if this would end up being an outright scam on par with YouTubers rug pulling their own audience with crypto. But lo and behold, now over 10 years later, Time 2 is finally here, and people all over are waiting to see if this will live up to the piles of money and years of hype, or go down as the biggest disappointment in metal history since Saint Anger. So what do we have here? 6 tracks, 2 of which are lengthier instrumentals acting as an intro and interlude over the course of 49 minutes. I will already give them credit on that note, as often if you give an artist free rein, you end up with something like Dan Aykroyd's aptly named Nothing But Trouble, a bloated mess with no sense of restraint. So props to Jari for keeping things pretty focused and on the rails at under an hour, and I would say the runtime ends up feeling pretty engaging and well-paced. Getting into the tracks, Fields of Snow does make for quite the atmospheric way to open things up. Over 4 minutes could be a little self-indulgent for an intro, but it's pretty captivating stuff to set the tone. All manner of instrumentation, from strings to what sounds like an effects-driven gutsang, are simulated here, and my apologies because I'm probably going to mispronounce and maybe in some cases like misidentify certain instruments, but I'm doing my best. But anyways, very much setting the stage for this record's very Eastern-inspired sound and vibe. You can see it in the cover art and also the band photos. As the layers build and hand drums kick in, you really get a sense of scope, not to mention the execution has enough unique texturing to make a genuinely memorable track on its own. We move from this into the 10-minute and 8-second The Way of the Fire, which really takes me back to what made me fall in love with Ensiferum all those years ago. The somber acoustic intro lulls the listener in before exploding into a deluge of those classic Jari guitar melodies that are equal parts folk, thrash, and melodic death metal, alongside more bombastic blasts of brass and choir. Now, if I were to guess where most of the time went into this record, it's definitely the synth work, and that's something Jari has talked about a lot in terms of like the computing power he needed. I'd genuinely be curious to know just how many layers I am hearing on this track alone. It feels almost on par with the work that went into Queen's A Night at the Opera, and with everything coming through absolutely crystal clear. But not to be outdone, the interplay of Jari's leads with now Megadeth guitar guitarist Timu Montisari, which again I apologize with these pronunciations, Finnish is hard. But this is once more a highlight. They duel this one out in spectacular fashion like gods flinging lightning from the clouds. Now if I can be somewhat critical, I'm not quite as enthusiastic about Yari's vocals. They work just fine, but I don't find myself particularly impressed with them here. And for all the effort that went into mixing the synth elements, I don't think the same can be said for Kai Hato's drums. His performance is great, but on the production end feels very clicky and a bit loud, while his fellow Nightwish counterpart Jukka Koskinen's bass is alternatively pretty buried. Still definitely a track that should please longtime fans. Next up is the much shorter One with the Shadows at 6 minutes and 19 seconds. It's a slower one with more of that classic folky swing to it, but still plenty of shredding and downright epic guitar soloing. Once more we get an emphasis on traditional Eastern instruments seeping in to add some additional personality to an already Carnegie Hall-worthy sounding track. Again, I think that Yari's vocals is strong, but far from the best part of this song. I do appreciate the little, again, Eastern-flavored melismas sprinkled in here and there. Next up is Ominous Clouds, acting as a bit of an intermission with equal parts moody and impressively technical but almost improvisational sounding guitar noodling over the actual sounds of rain and thunder. Getting some pretty strong Yngwie Malmsteen Black Star vibe stylistically on this one. This transitions seamlessly into the 12-minute and 16-second storm, appropriately carrying over those building cracks of thunder, and much like the arrival of a real storm, sets in quietly before suddenly bringing the fury of the elements. Lots of great cascading piano on this one, and the general denseness and speed reminds me quite a bit of Flesh God Apocalypse. I'd also say that this is probably the strongest track vocally. Love the alternations of the harsh and clean elements really adding to the melodrama of it all. There seems to be a real attention to detail on the placement of each syllable, and when to hit those high notes for maximum effect. That section towards the 5-minute mark with the chugging rhythm guitars, wailing solo, and blasts of brass really put a smile on my face, combining those Flesh God comparisons once more with my favorite moments of the early Ensiferum records. And lest the lengthy runtime become boring, right when things are hitting a peak, they slow things down with some acoustic, leading into another fantastic bit of neoclassical guitar harmonizing, seeming to call back to some of the sound of the interlude that preceded it, but now taken to a Squizgar soloing alone on a mountaintop level. And then we close with the longest track in Silver Leaves at 13 minutes and 31 seconds. Once more, the synth really carries this one with a sense of wonder, going for a very Eastern sound comparable to the likes of Tenger Cavalry. This is thanks to a number of twinkling layered elements, but primarily led by the sounds of a mournful Morin Kur that really pulls at my heartstrings and ends up outshining any of the guitar or vocals, though I will say that this is another one of Yari's stronger performances on the latter. It builds to an admittedly stunning crescendo before closing out on ambient sounds of what I believe is again wind and rain blowing through leaves and wind chimes. Oddly enough, this ended up taking me back to the first time I listened to Incubus's Morning View back in the 2000s. So, was it all worth it? I must say, I have some mixed feelings. On the one hand, is it a good album? Absolutely. In fact, it is stellar, and I wouldn't be surprised to see it end up on plenty of year-end lists. The songwriting, performances, and orchestration are all top-notch and really tap into some of my favorite things. On the other, I can't help but be harsher with this record given its context in comparison to your average 2 to 3 year cycle album. Given the time and money involved, my expectations are much higher, and I'm just not sure it necessarily lives up to them. It's hardly the first time I have heard a record of this sound and scope. Once more, comparisons to Tenger Cavalry and also things like Moon Sorrow and Septic Flesh come to mind, and those albums didn't take nearly this long or expense to make. Again, the level of layering and clear passion show, but over $500,000 show? I'm not fully convinced. Still, I am one to always preach quality over quantity, and I appreciate it when bands take their time to make something great rather than forcing out a record after a record after a record. And at the very least, this is a much stronger outcome than Tool's Fear Inoculum. Before I turn to my 3 rating scales for my final grade, just a reminder to hit the like button if you've enjoyed the video so far, hit the dislike if you dislike, and also comment your own thoughts below. But turning to enjoyability first, I give it an A. Really engrossing and engaging runtime, which once more gives an example of how to justify longer songs. They really know how to pace things out to keep things interesting and make me enjoy it all the way through. In terms of musicianship, I give it like an A-. The songwriting and performances are fantastic, and I'm really impressed with the amount of care going into the synth work in particular. But again, I wish the same went into the sound of the drums, and giving the bass a bit more to do would be nice, but otherwise really excellent stuff. And then I give it a C for innovation. Conceptually, this is very familiar stuff. It's not a cheap copycat by any means, but I think that this is the one area where for the time it took and the money, I would have appreciated a little bit more originality. So putting that all together, averaging it out, I give Time 2 a very solid B+. Definitely worth a listen, but you can decide if it's worth your money. Y'all check out this video for my Ensiferum tier list of their entire discography, or this video for whatever YouTube wants to recommend you personally. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.